physical therapy? Alright, so way back in the old days when I still had hair and I was in much better shape and not nearly as broken, I was doing a lecture on whatever martial arts topic I happened to be talking about. Obviously it involved a knife because I had one in my hands, and I realized people weren't really paying attention to what I was saying. And then I played back the video. Yeah, this one was being taped, and I realized that the entire time I didn't know it, but I was just doing this, and it was a bit distracting. Now, people have mentioned in some of the knife videos that I've done already my awesome knife flipping skills. Well, I don't think my knife flipping skills are terribly awesome for a couple of reasons. One, I have very, very stubby fingers as compared to the average person. And two, I've obviously talked about in other videos the damage my wrists have taken, both in terms of tendons and arthritis and stuff like that. So I'd say I used to be a lot better at it than I am now, but I still practice it, well, not just for whatever practical use it might have in my martial arts endeavors, but kind of consider it physical therapy for some of my injuries to keep up on that. I figured what I'd do is take a shot at doing a quick-ish tutorial on some of the techniques that I use that I've learned and see if they might make any sense or use to you. Now, caveats to always get out of the way. I don't consider myself any kind of master expert, anything like that. I don't intend to contradict anything that you might be learning in whatever martial art involving a knife that you might be doing. This is not intended ever to represent the teaching of any specific martial art. Just, again, these are the techniques that I have taken with me and tend to still use to this day. And caveats, some of these are dangerous. I'll show you some safety options where you can start learning this, and yeah, we'll talk about injury potential. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and throw in caveat 5. Damaged tendons, arthritic hands, stubby fingers. You might have a totally different, not only level of success, but maybe techniques that just work better for you. All right, enough rambling and fiddling with this thing. Let me break it down. Practically speaking, flipping is designed to transition your knife from one of the forward grips, whether you're talking about hammer grip, handshake, saber, fencers, into a reverse grip and back again. Now, there are benefits to all of these different grips that I'll talk about in other videos, and drawbacks to the different hand positions and things like that, and the techniques you could do out of them. Don't want to get into that here. But one recommendation I would absolutely make is that flipping is absolutely going to be different if you're dealing with a resisting opponent. If you are sparring, practicing knife fighting, or God forbid in a real life situation, it's going to interfere with your ability to do anything nearly this complex. The chaos, the interfering factors, what your opponent's doing, and yes, your own adrenaline. You're going to want to keep it simple. Another recommendation I would absolutely make is if you are getting within measure at all, don't flip. Whatever orientation you happen to be in, go ahead and commit to that and work with it until you can break outside of measure and have a little bit more room to pull off a transitional movement. It's not something you're going to be able to do in the middle of an engagement, so be aware of that. Now, a couple of different techniques I'm going to cover today, from those that I don't use quite so much but might be a little bit more user-friendly to you, to the ones that I commonly use. They are going to be affected by, well, the design of the knife, the length, the balance, the grip shape, and how that interacts with your hands. So I'm going to show a couple of different examples. Now, I initially learned, as I mentioned in my videos, on the Gerber Mark II with the Gerber Mark II, and the Gerber Mark II lends itself really well to these techniques. I would also say something like the Sykes Fairburn lends itself really well to these techniques, and then there's going to be some changes you're going to need to make for other kinds of grip designs. But I've also described this knife as being particularly dangerous because of how sharp it is. So as a learning tool, if you don't have a blunt analog to start practicing with, well, you can use anything of similar size and shape that's blunt. So for instance, one of the things that I might commonly train with as a blunt option, this would be a jute, and maybe I'll talk about this in another video, but it gives me something that's blunt and reasonably large knife sized that I can practice some of these techniques, and I might clock myself, but I'm not going to cut myself with it. But it is definitely heavier and a different balance distribution to a knife. Going completely in the other direction, you might simply pick up something like a pen, and yeah, you can at least practice some of the finger manipulation skills and get them down without, much risk of stabbing yourself. So I definitely recommend doing it with something blunt. You could get a ruler, you can get a piece of dowel or a stick, or any of a number of other things that, would be a lot safer than practicing with a live blade. Or you can go out and, spend the $7 to $10 or however much it costs to get a plastic or rubber analog. Those are some options. There are also wooden knives on the market and things like that. So, safety first. First technique I want to get out of the way is one that I'm not fond of, but you do, yes, see me do it sometimes because I trained it, and that would be the toss. Now, the toss is affected by the length of the knife, the balance of the knife, and certain other things, but for me, there is a line in the sand between whether I'm using it to flip it forward or backwards. And this is going to be a little high risk, so don't try this particular one at home with a live knife, especially not to start out with. But for instance, taking the forward grip and tossing it into the back grip. You're not the Winter Soldier. I don't like that one because, well, one, it doesn't feel nearly as good as the other one, but yeah, I'm throwing a sharpened weapon potentially at myself, whether my body, my face, or my own forearm. However, you will see me use it with a little bit more confidence and therefore frequency to flip a knife from a reverse grip to a forward grip, but it has to have a sense of balance that it feels like it's going to stay put. So try it with a couple of other knives. For instance, the K-bar. So I didn't use the toss to send it into the reverse position, but for me, I'm familiar with the balance and shape of this knife that when I toss it forward, it feels like that grip stays in the palm. But obviously, any other movement that's going on is going to throw that off, and you're going to lose your knife. Amusingly, I trained in a couple of forms where there were transitions in fancy moves like spinning, and there was one where you started in the reverse grip and you did a spin, transitioned it into the forward grip, and came around and stabbed, the real or imagined opponent there. Doing this with that spin action, it would send the knife flying across the dojo. Dumb idea. But when it comes to, what happens to motor movement under adrenaline, a little bit less complex. All right, the second least complicated technique for flipping that I use in situations where, again, it might be very chaotic, I might not be in the ideal situation, might be adrenalized and therefore not have the best access to my finest motor skills, I call a pinch flip. But this flip is very dependent on the design of the knife, the length, the balance, very specifically the shape of the grip. So I'll start with an ideal, in this case, the Cold Steel OSS, because it has a bit of a flare here at the pommel. I often use it for transition from the reverse grip to the forward grip. And in my review on these sub-hilt knives, I mentioned how I've been carrying some of these longer ones set up to be drawn in the reverse grip. If I want to transition to that forward grip, what I'll do is I will pinch in that depression, my thumb and forefinger, and then just rotate the knife forward, just like that. So I've got to be able to do that and not lose control of the knife. So you can already see how the shape and texture of the grip is going to affect this. Then I'm just going to let it drop into my hand. Now the problem with this is it tends to drop the knife into your hand in a knife it's not double-edged in terms of a uniformly oriented double edge. It definitely has a forward edge leading. It does wind up dropping the knife back into your hand kind of backwards, so you do have to take that fraction of a second to turn it around. Now going back the other way is a tad more complicated. I've got to do whatever I need to do to get my fingers towards the end of the pommel, drop it down. Again, you're going to wind up with the edge of the knife oriented, well, possibly in the wrong direction. If it's a knife that's perfectly comfortable to hold in either orientation, it's probably not going to be an issue in a pinch. But for this with the sub hilt, yeah, this is not a good one. I'm going to have to take that moment to rotate the knife again forward. But for me, if the hilt is allowing me to do this surely versus the finger flip, which are just habitually used. All right, let's talk about the Mark II, for instance. It does have a little bit of a flare there and some texture on that powder coating. So yeah, I can do that. And again, the direction of the knife here doesn't matter, so I'm going to turn it around in my grip. So I can get away with that. Let's take a look at another example. My old friend the K-bar has a big flare on the pommel, right? You'd think that would certainly assist with this. But over the years, this stacked leather grip has gotten pretty smooth for me. I feel a little slippery here. I feel like I'm going to accidentally fling this. So, all right. Simple. Let's talk about that fancy finger action. All right, so this is probably the thing that you clicked on the video to see. The finger twirling, finger flipping. This is the one that takes the most practice, is the highest risk, requires, yes, the finest motor skills that you might not be able to pull off under stress. There are two directions for flipping, at least in my head. There's probably more than that if you really wanted to play with it. But in this case, we're going to be talking about whatever hand you happen to have on the knife, whatever orientation to the blade is going to matter to one degree or another, shape of grip, balance of knife, things like that, and I'll demonstrate it with a couple of different blades. But mostly what I'm going to be considering to delineate these two techniques is the direction of rotation. If I use lines familiar to fencers and martial artists, to the outside, to the inside. But what's going to happen is I'm going to use a combination of thumb, forefinger, and the other fingers like so. If I'm rotating to the outside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the knife between thumb, middle finger, rotate my index finger over, gives me a pinch grip between my index finger and my middle finger, okay. I'm going to rotate it over. That's going to allow me to move the thumb to the other side of the knife, and then shift my lower fingers, regrasp the knife. That was a forward to a reverse grip. If I want to go back in the same rotation, I can do that. I simply, again, bring my index finger over, pinch between my two middle fingers long enough to bring my thumb over, flip it over the top, reposition those lower fingers. So basically what I've got is that, okay? That's the one I tend to use the most. Depends on how the knife is balanced. If I feel like I actually give the knife a little bit of a nudge that way in the swing, I can get more momentum into this part. I mean, just start with this part. Get it between thumb and forefinger to two middle fingers as a good starting point, and then figure out where your thumb is, and then you can kind of get your other fingers back over there. This knife, the contours of it, the narrowness of the areas I'm operating in makes that really, really easy. Let's take a look at, well, something a little bit more rubbery with a sub hilt in the way. Let it rotate a little bit to the outside, get that index finger over the top, drop it between the index finger, middle finger, get the thumb back over, and yeah, you can just keep going like that. So it does require some finger dexterity, some practice. It's probably going to give you sore, achy hands for a bit. And I do recommend absolutely practicing just the basic movement with something blunt, okay? Just something blunt. And in this case, because it's so small, I really am just focusing on the action of three fingers. So first my index finger goes over, it's between here, then my thumb goes over, and then it's back, and then I get my middle finger back on the side of the the implement that I want it on. So that's my outside rotation technique. How about a really stout blade? Let's look at this Becker. The bigger and heavier the knife, especially with my stubby fingers and my arthritic hands, makes it harder for me to do this. But there is a little bit of a taper space in there that feels reasonably good for me to do this rotation. Okay? Not nearly as graceful or as confidence-inducing. Let's take a look at some folders. Well, here's a big stout cold steel SR1 light, pretty square grip. Yeah, I can do that because there's not a lot of room between my fingers. It feels pretty comfortable for me to get my hands around. Now you'll notice I hung up a little bit on the pocket clip there, made it a little bit more awkward, but I can do it. Something a little smaller and lighter like this Civivi could be arguably easier, but there's not a lot of weight and balance to propel it once you get used to propelling it. I wouldn't focus on that sense of needing to propel the knife or whatever it is you're flipping in the direction of the flip yet. Work on the finger action first, slowly, and then see if you can get more movement into it. Okay? Slowly but surely. All right. That's actually my favorite direction. Let's talk about the other direction. All right, so hopefully I haven't already lost or discouraged you. Take it slow, take your time, and you may wind up using a technique that's completely different than what I'm showing you. Outside rotation. Let's talk about inside rotation. Again, obviously, depending on which hand I've got on the knife, that's going to make a difference. But the idea of the inside rotation, again, it might depend on how you're moving in general or the balance or shape of the knife. Might work a little bit better in certain circumstances. I'll use the inside versus the outside flip. It's basically what I showed you, kind of upside down and backwards, if that makes any sense. So again, start with focusing on that grip between your thumb and forefinger. This time you're going to hold that grip and move the middle and lower fingers first. So going there to get from thumb and forefinger, a proper grip, shall we say, to this transitional grip between your index and middle finger, which then allows you to get the thumb back on it and move that index finger back over. Now from the reverse grip, I'm going to kind of swing it out. I'm going to hold it for a second between thumb and index finger while I get my lower three fingers on the opposite side of the knife. So then for a second there, it's going to be between, again, middle and index until my thumb can come over. I'm going to get it between those lower fingers and my thumb. Bring the index finger over. Arguably, there's certain parts of either one of these that are more secure, but it's a give and take in either direction. It really does depend on the shape of the grip, balance of the knife, and your own dexterity. You know, what might be getting in your way. Now this is again something I can get a little rotation in, a little momentum flipping the thing over, but don't try that in the beginning to get me started in this direction. Kind of throw it, spin it that way to allow me to get that rotation to come over a little bit better. This is not one that I like as much, especially with the damage I've taken to hands and tendons and things like that, but I'll still do it. So inside flip, outside flip. You kind of see the point of rotation in both of them is about the same. Let me break it down with the old safe pen. Again, instead of going this way, what I'm doing is I'm going to be going this way. So, yeah, hold it here, move these lower fingers over, rotate, re-grab, get your index finger back where it belongs. So this was the first one going that way, which for a pen puts it right in the pen writing position, right until I reset my grip, to going this way. Now, different kinds of knives. Here's that sub-hilt, being able to, and again, you'll notice I let it drop first so I can move my fingers a little bit easier. and then propel it. Balance of the knife, length of the knife is going to make a difference. So that's one thing you can consider doing, and you'll kind of feel out as you practice. If I'm going this way, yeah, I'll kind of toss the knife that way, and that's my outside rotation setup, right? This one I'm doing the same thing, but it's allowing me to catch the knife between thumb and forefinger, gives me room to move those lower fingers over. I rotate it back, re-grab it, and you'll notice what I did basically there is I just tangled my fingers up in the subhilt. Going back the other way, same kind of a thing. Maybe give it a little rotation in the wrong direction, let it swing back over so I can get my lower fingers over while I'm holding the knife here with that nice little palm swell, that little flare at the pommel between my index finger and thumb, up over the top. Okay. Big old stout Becker. This one, again, a lot of weight in the blade. Give it a little bit of a toss. So bringing it back this way, instead of moving the index finger, what I'll do is I'll keep it between the thumb and index finger, move those lower fingers, rotate it back. For a second there, it's between the fingers. And then the last thing that comes across is the index finger. Going back again the other way. Does seem like quite a struggle, doesn't it? Especially with a bigger, heavier, chunky knife. All right, square-handled folder. Get that lower set of fingers over on the other side of the knife. Transitional movement where I'm between my fingers. Get my thumb back where it belongs. And then as I re-grip it with the lower fingers, that gives me a chance to drag that index finger back. Smaller one. Don't really have any momentum to propel it, so it's usually just however I need to operate it in my fingers to get my fingers in the right place. Thumb and forefinger, lower fingers come over, rotate. Ta-dam, ta-dam, maybe ta-dam, I don't know. The idea is just as you get a general feel of the knife, you'll kind of get a sense of which way it rotates the best. There's some orientations that the grip or the balance will favor. Sometimes the guard or guards will get in your way. Shape, length of grip. There's a lot having to do with it. If I've got more blade presence, okay, I didn't think about this. Remember my project? Trying to make myself a variation on a Boker without spending Boker money on it. This is that Walther knife that I reprofiled. Has that taper, has that grippiness, doesn't have the flare at the pommel. Weight of the knife, because of those metal inserts, is very much in here, not here. That gives me a certain sense of rotation in the hand, but doesn't necessarily benefit me to throw the blade very much into the spin. But all in all, doesn't make a whole lot of difference inside-outside rotation. Okay, it works in either one. I can get away with that pinch flip. I can also get away with, well, again, I don't like to toss it from forward to reverse because I'm tossing it towards myself. But yeah, that balance in the hand really does allow me to toss to the forward one in situations where I feel that would be safe and I wouldn't simply be flinging my knife away. But now, orientation of those finger flips doesn't have to be windshield wiper side to side. I mean, you can change your rotation to make it look a little bit more going in the forward line, right? As you get used to this. Now, that does bring the sharp tip of something potentially closer to face, arm, chest, whatever. So again, I would recommend you do this with a blunt practice analog and not a sharp thing until you're really, really comfortable with these movements. And even then, there's risk. You are taking a lot of risk in your hand, flipping around something sharp and pointy around very vulnerable areas of yourself or maybe somebody else. Please don't do it around anybody else. Be also aware that, yeah, the environment you're in, you might wind up flinging this thing. You gotta be okay and safe with that too. So don't be doing it around other people. Have I made that mistake before? Yeah. Once upon a time in my stupid youth. Okay. ending the conversation without me distracting you by flipping stuff all over the place. I hope this was useful. Let me know. Let's get our usual conversation going in the comments, including if there are any techniques that work for you. Let's share that information. I am still, yes, learning. But until then, thanks for watching, following, and subscribing, and I do hope to see you back for, well, whatever I get around to next.